Hi class, this is Professor Banker. I'm going to talk about your posts related to theories of truth. I've already given some lectures. I don't want to repeat myself too much. I'd like to engage in some questions about these theories. So the correspondence theory of truth, truth is corresponding my beliefs or the things I say to reality. So if what I say corresponds to reality, to the way things really are, to the facts, it's true. If what I say, what I think, what I believe does not correspond to reality or the way things actually are, then it's deemed false. So this view, this theory of truth, assumes that as a human being, I can know actual reality, that I have access to the way the world really is. And I can measure and see if the things I believe or the things I say match up to reality. I can measure whether the things someone else says or what someone else believes match up with reality, correspond to reality. Now this is a disputed assumption within philosophy. Do human beings have access to reality as it truly is? Many philosophers would argue you can never escape your worldview, your perspective, your way of looking and thinking to see things clearly. I will always experience the world as a man. I will always experience the world as an American. I will always experience the world as a Christian through my set of experiences, a lens that has been built according to my education, again, my surroundings, my marriage. I can't see the world any way else, so I can't really see the way the world really is. I can only see it from my perspective. So that's a real debate. Do human beings have access to reality? If we do, at least at times, have access to real facts, the way the world really is, then the correspondence theory will work. And then it's a matter of using sense experience, observation, reason, other things to get to reality, to figure out the way the world really is, and then conform our beliefs and the things we say to that, and they will be true, according to the correspondence theory. If we don't have access to the way the world really is, then we can't use the correspondence theory because we'll never really know whether the things we believe and the things we say correspond to reality. And this is where the coherence theory comes in, right? The coherence theory says you have a worldview, and that's what you're going to use to judge the world by. Part of your worldview you inherited because you were born into a particular country, culture, language, religion. Part of it you structure based on your choices and your experiences and whether you go to college or not and what job you go into. So your worldview is part in your control, part you inherit. It's part communal. You didn't create it on your own. You hold the worldview that's common with other folks. But that's what you're going to use. So they say, well, you better make your worldview as coherent as possible. Don't have contradictions in it. Learn as much as you can. Try to grow, see the world from as many perspectives as you can. Because the more you learn, the more perspectives you have, the bigger your worldview gets, the broader it gets, the more it's able to interpret things more clearly, more consistently, more coherently. The less you know about the world, the less worldviews you've been exposed to, the less educated you are, the more narrow your worldview becomes. So then it's a matter of when something is presented to you, you take it to your worldview, is this true or false? And you can do that in many different ways. And of course the pragmatic view is about results. What's the bottom line? Does acting as though this were true get us to better results or not so much, right? How would that look? So if we look at these in terms of juries, which is what I ask you to do if it's a trial, the correspondence theory says as a juror you're going to look at the information and say, does what the witnesses say correspond to reality as a fact, the way things are? Does the fingerprint, DNA evidence correspond to reality? Does the witness testimony fit with what we know about the world and how things work? And it's going to be pretty black and white. The coherence theory will say, well, as a juror, you'll never know fully what happened. You can't go back and try, and you'll never know whether the witness's testimony corresponds to reality or not. Instead, you're going to hear the prosecution's case, you're going to hear the defense's case, you're going to look at both of them in their entirety and say, which holds together the best, which makes the most sense of the most data, the most evidence, which seems most coherent with human nature and the way humans are motivated and behave. And you're going to try to piece it together. And in the end, maybe neither one of them fits well, and you have to say, well, he's innocent because we don't really know. Or maybe the prosecution's case is just very strong and compelling, all things being equal, and you say guilty or vice versa. But you're never going to know exactly. It's going to be an approximation. It's going to be a matter of degree, a matter of gray. But some things are darker gray, some worldviews, some stories, some pieces of evidence than others. And that might help lead us towards a kind of approximation of the truth. And then the pragmatic theory is more about trying to figure out how to approach this from a way that will tend to get us towards a just society. Assuming a just society is what we desire and we think that's pragmatic and good for the most people, then we'll work really hard to sort of approach this from an outcomes-based perspective. We might not know the truth in some abstract sense, but certainly we can figure out what a judgment might do for society as a whole, what a sentencing might do for this individual or for this family as a whole, and what will this produce. That's what we really care about. I really like the post. I thought you guys did a good job. I can give you my own bias. I lean pretty heavily towards the coherence theory. As a philosopher, I'm skeptical that we can know reality as it truly is. I think even fingerprint and DNA analysis, there's good evidence to suggest that it can be interpreted in multiple ways. Now, there's less gray with DNA than with fingerprints. But even still, you have to have humans who are trying to figure out whether it's a match and how to enter this data in and how to interpret it well. And it's hard to say that objectively it gives us the right answer. But I think it's very reliable. Lots of court cases don't have DNA. Lots of trials don't have that kind of dark gray or objective evidence. And so it really is approximating the truth based on holistic thinking, piecing it together the best we can with the information we've been given as the jury. Now the correspondence theory, we might be able to use it in part. There might be things that are more objective that we could say, yes, we use the correspondence. But as a whole, I think the coherence theory is used more often and probably should be used more often. I think it fits the human perspective the best. I don't have access to absolute or objective reality. It's always filtered from my perspective. If I acknowledge that up front and try to create my worldview in a way that is open, broad, well thought out, and consistent, then I'm going to be a better arbiter of truth than if my perspective and my worldview is a really bad, closed-minded one. So that's sort of where I'm at. I think also the correspondence theory has a really hard time with metaphysical truths like God's existence, how to interpret a biblical passage. I'm not sure how to correspond. Like, what if I say Paul means this in Ephesians? What am I corresponding my interpretation to? I don't know what to. Am I corresponding it to the original author's intended meaning? Am I corresponding it to the mind of God? I don't know. But with coherence, I can say, well, does this interpretation coherence fit with the chapter as a whole, the book as a whole? Does it fit with scriptural themes as a whole? And I can look at my interpretation in terms of how it fits with these varying levels of interpretation that might help. Does it fit with Christian tradition and the way people have interpreted in the past? Coherence can get at these kinds of truths correspond as difficult. Same with morality. What do I correspond my moral views to? Is it the mind of God? Is it something else? But the coherence theory can say, is your moral framework consistent? Is it coherent? Does it have contradictions? Does it cohere again with a scriptural view of this issue? So I don't know definitively, objectively, my moral view corresponds to this reality, but I can certainly create a coherent moral perspective that helps me make decisions. So I think the coherence theory is effective because the correspondence theory has difficulty with morality, difficulty with metaphysics. Coherence maybe deals with it a little easier. So again, you don't have to agree with me. This is just sort of my argument as we look at these theories. But I certainly think there are times when the correspondence theory is needed. There are times when the pragmatic theory is important. For instance, I mentioned scripture reading. One might say, well, you can read Scripture trying to figure out what the meaning of the passage is, but you might also read Scripture to say, how does this apply to me? What does this mean for my life? How does this make me a different person? And that's very pragmatic, a pragmatic theory of truth. So maybe all three are important in different ways and in different times, and I'm simply making a plea that the coherence is maybe the one that we use most often, or ought to use most often. So if you have any responses, disagreements, pushback, I'd be anxious to hear it. I hope this helps. If you have any questions at all, let me know. And I hope you guys have a great day.